So just on the introduction here, some of the important things. So in extension, one of our goals is always to provide research-based information to make sure our information and sources are research-based, that we provide accurate and really good detailed information. Now, when we're looking at rabbit projects specifically, some of the issues we run into is that there's kind of three categories that rabbit information falls under. So first of all is companionship. I mean, we all know how many people have pet rabbits. And so there's a lot of information about there about pet rabbits. There's a lot of different little sizes, different things like that. And so, there is some good tips that can come from companionship animals, but in that same breath, they might not match kind of what we're looking for as we're doing kind of these meat or fiber rabbits. Now, there's also a show and hobby section, and that show and hobby section can have a lot to it. There's a lot of differences in the show world and the hobby world. There's a lot of things going on, but again, it's not directed specifically at the meat or fiber production. And so really that's what we're going to be hitting on is the food and fiber production of these animals, these rabbits. And so really today we're going to be talking about that. We're not going to get into the fiber as much. We're more going to talk about raising these animals as meat rabbits and kind of the processes of doing that. So one thing we wanted to start off with here before we get going too far is we actually wanted to talk about the RHDV2 virus, which is the rabbit hemorrhagic disease. It's a very contagious and fatal disease, and it's in both our wild and we have seen cases in our domesticated rabbits. And so this disease it moves really fast and can cause fatalities. In fact, they've had to shut down a lot of shows. So while we were sitting here dealing with coronavirus, the rabbits were actually dealing with their own thing. And this has been confirmed in Utah. I think on the next slide, we have some of the confirmation. So here it just shows kind of where we've seen it in Utah. We've seen it in Duchesne, Grand, Iron, Millard, Salt Lake, San Juan, San Pete, and Wayne. Now, you may notice that we've seen it a lot more in wild and feral than we have seen it in domestic, but we are seeing it in domestic. And one of the things we wanted to mention before we got started too much in this project is we just wanted to say it's important that we're careful in maintaining things. They think that some of these domestic cases actually came because the hay was contaminated. So one of the things you're going to want to consider, and Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you might want to consider getting hay that has been stored longer, that's not necessarily as fresh, just so the virus can go out. Do you remember what the timing was on that, Jesse? Didn't you say there was a timing on that storage?
Yes, I believe it's 3 months.
3 months. So you might want to make sure, that hay's been 3 months or longer. And for instance, the lady, so we're actually driving to Reno to grab the rabbits that we're picking up, but she is making us go wash our car before we even go to her place because she has a lot of different rabbits. And she basically says it's not worth the risk. So you have to wash your car before you show up. So anyway, it is a serious thing that's going on, and that's something to consider as you get started. I'm going to pass it back over to Jesse now. So.
Okay, thanks, Jake. So I am just going to talk a little bit about the benefits of rabbit. You guys are all urban homesteaders, and so there's a lot of different things that you can be utilizing your land, especially a small acreage for. I know the backyard chickens is really popular, backyard goats. So why rabbit? So we're going to talk about the nutrition of rabbit meat, the economics, how practical they are, and then kind of the purposes of our rabbits. So from a nutrition standpoint, we're going to talk about 3 things. This all comes from a study done several years back, but the information is still relevant from Alabama A&M University. We're going to talk about protein, cholesterol, and calories of rabbits compared to some of our other popular meat choices. So protein, this is pretty easy to see. Rabbit has the highest percentage of protein per pound of product. So if you're eating 6 ounces of rabbit, you're going to get more protein than if you eat 6 ounces of beef or pork or lamb. For cholesterol, rabbit is significantly lower in terms of their cholesterol. And if you are on a low cholesterol diet or that's something that you're watching, then a lot of health recommendations would be to limit your red meat and especially your like your beefs and your pork. And with rabbit, it's still considered a red meat, still very palatable, but has a much lower cholesterol threshold. So definitely fits within that diet if that's what you're doing. And then finally, calories. We all know what calories are and what they do, and we're always counting them. But rabbits have the lower caloric intake of all of our meat products, other than maybe fish, but of our red meat mammal products, they are the lowest, even lower than chicken, which is really interesting. And that's research that was really profound. So half the calories of pork, lamb, and beef. So if you're looking for a really sustainable, highly nutritious, low caloric food, rabbit is a really good option.
Perfect. Now, kind of moving on to the economics about rabbits. And so, one of the nice things is due to their size, due to kind of their efficiency, there really is relatively low startup cost. For us, I mean, we live basically on a really small acreage, just a house with a regular yard and stuff. So, when we're considering this, I mean, the low startup cost combined with the size of the animals really worked for us. I mean, we're agriculture kids, so we've wanted to have our own production system. And so really right now this is kind of the one that has made sense to us. And so some of the housing or some of the things that we need to consider with this economics is we kind of got us to consider the housing, supplies, feed, as well as the rabbits. Now, before we get going into that, one thing I did want to say is it's important that we have a minimum of 36 square inches for rabbits weighing 6 pounds. So honestly, the end of the day, the rule of thumb is as big as you can manage to make sure that these rabbits have plenty of space that they can get around and move, and just make sure they're not too confined in these cages or anything. Now, honestly, housing can be made by yourself. There's a lot of people who do these, kits at home. I will say with the prices of lumber right now, it might not make sense to be building out a lumber because who knows when that's going to come back down. But overall, you can find materials, you can find different things that can be used. I know that Jesse is a part of multiple, groups and different things that are constantly looking to sell or buy rabbit cages and different things. So you can be able to find these products fairly easily. And so moving on to the next slide, it's going to be there are many options. I mean, you're going to find options online. You're going to find them in store at your farm stores. So, for instance, cages, we have them for $38. I have seen that some of these cage prices have gone up. You might be looking more in the $50 range. Just a heads up. Nest boxes are looking about 12. Feeders about $8, and water bottles about $4. So that's just something important to consider as you're going through the economics. Now, if we're looking at feed specifically, one of the things you're really going to want to make sure that you have is you want to make sure you have a complete pellet. These pellets are going to be good for the rabbit, be able to help them grow, and will provide basically all the nutrients they need. Now, if you're looking for, if you're feeding your breeding animals, you might not want to be feeding them just pellets. Hay can really help with the digestive system, can really help make sure that these animals maintain and really just, have longevity. And what I mean by that is that they can live long lives, their digestive system's healthy, and they're just moving along perfectly. So now, after you get your feed source, you're going to be looking for your rabbits. Now, when you're starting a meat system or meat rabbit operation, one of the things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start with a trio. Now, when you're going to buy this trio, you want to make sure that you actually are buying them from the same breeder because you want to make sure that you know that these rabbits are already compatible. Now, one thing we recommend is that you search out a breed. You don't necessarily just do mixed breeds. Mixed breeds are great. We don't have a problem with them. It's just when you're getting started, it's great to kind of start with a breed so you have a system. When starting with a trio, you're going to be looking at $0 to $60 a rabbit. If you get into a really high quality trio, you might be more like $100 to $120 a rabbit. So that's just something to think about with the rabbits overall. Now, we talked about the practical nature of these of rabbits specifically. Now, just some things to mention. I'll go through this pretty quick. These animals really are clean. I mean, we have a pet rabbit inside that basically she does everything she needs to in a litter box. And so she basically is trained really well there. These animals like to be clean. They keep their pens clean. They're quiet. You're not going to have to worry about a rooster crowing, with these rabbits. They're space efficient, like we talked about. And one of the biggest things is they're very fast growing. Honestly, their gestation is only 30 days, and the rabbits are ready to harvest for meat at 12 weeks. And so really the process is very easy. It's a lot less mess than any other livestock species if you're looking at processing these animals. Now, last but not least, there's multi-purpose. I mean, we've talked about the food. We've also talked about the fiber. There's also like things like Angora rabbits that you can consider with, different types of furs. But one of the biggest things that I think gets left out is thinking about fertilizer. There's a lot of gardeners who are actually looking for specifically rabbit manure compost. They like that rabbit manure just because it's a good consistency. The nutrients are low, they're not too high, but they kind of still pack a punch. And so really it's dry and odorless. It just really does really well. And there's a lot of gardeners who are constantly looking for this source. So
Okay, so hopefully, if you didn't already know that rabbits are a great option for your backyard homestead, hopefully now that gives you a little bit more confidence if you're thinking of going down that road. So let's talk about what it takes to get started in a meat rabbit herd or operation. We're going to go over selection, how to select your rabbits, some general care, and then the meat rabbit cycle at the end. So when we're talking about selection, this slide, obviously huge contrast. You have a Holland Lop on the left. This is a rabbit that maxes out at 4 pounds and preferably smaller. And on the right, you have a New Zealand, which is approximately 10 pounds. So drastic difference in terms of meat rabbit type. Obviously, you're going to go for the bigger meat type rabbit versus the smaller, fancier Holland Lop. But bigger is not always better. So a lot of people right now are selling Flemish giants, continental giants, checkered giants, like the rabbit that is pictured here on the left. These are rabbits that get very big, but they eat more and they're not as efficient. And so just to demonstrate this, these are two carcasses. The one on the bottom is a New Zealand white. The one on the top is the checkered giant. So that slide, checkered giant, New Zealand white. Both of these rabbits were 6 months old. They were both pedigreed, high quality, healthy rabbits, and they were both fed approximately the same type of feed. So they were on a high quality pellet, free choice, so they could eat as much as they wanted, and they were both harvested at the same weight. The checkered giant carcass was 4 pounds, 3.4 ounces, and the New Zealand carcass was 4 pounds, 15.8 ounces. Now, that may not seem like a big difference, but if you look at the size and the amount of muscle to bone ratio that the New Zealand white has, it's obviously more worth your time and your energy and your resources to be pouring into an animal that has been specifically bred to produce a high quality meat carcass. So the American Rabbit Breeders Association has 50 recognized breeds, and there's over 15 commercial type, and commercial type is going to be your meat rabbits. So this is a really good place to start. I'm going to kind of go over just these top 4. These are the 4 most popular rabbit breeds in the American Rabbit Breeders Association. Now, I don't want to discount mixed breed rabbits because I think that there is a lot of benefit, especially if you are using an intentional crossbreeding system. And what I mean by that is you're not going to go just pick up a feral rabbit from the neighbor down the street and expect to be creating a high quality meat carcass. But if you guys are familiar with the term hybrid vigor, basically when you have 2 animals that have been line bred from 2 separate lines, so for example, a California and a New Zealand, and you breed them together, the offspring will outperform the average of the parents. So basically you're going to be getting, you might be getting a little bit of hybrid vigor if you're doing an intentional crossbreeding system, but just mixing your rabbits willy-nilly is not a good idea, especially if you're trying to be efficient with your production. So I'm just going to go through each of these breeds. California, these are the biggest rabbits. These are probably the most, when people think of a meat rabbit, at least me, this is what I think of. I think of this Himalayan color with the white body and the black points. Californians are the largest and they grow the fastest. You have a New Zealand, which they are not as large as the California, but they're just as fast growing. And these are the most popular meat rabbits. And the picture we have here is just of a standard white, a red-eyed white rabbit, but New Zealand's actually come in a multitude of different colors. And so if you're interested in maybe having a little bit of variety, then maybe a New Zealand is a good option. Speaking of color, Palominos, lots of people like these rabbits because they have that nice, rich, creamy coat color. They're, again, just a little bit smaller than the California, more in line with the New Zealand, but really fast-growing meat-type rabbits. And then last but certainly not least, because this is Jake and I's favorite, the Satin. The Satin is the smallest of these 4 breeds, but it is still considered a compact meat rabbit. And what's really cool about the satin is that they actually have clear or opaque or transparent guard hairs. And so when the sun hits it, it creates that sheen. So pretty cool in terms of their fur type. And so if you're looking for a rabbit that is dual purpose, that the pelts have some value as well as the meat, then maybe a satin's a good option. So really what I want to express is that there are a lot of different breeds, and there's 50 recognized breeds in ARBA, so lots to choose from. But do your research, find a breed that sounds good to you and that you're interested in promoting, even if that's a cross. If you really like the way that your New Zealand and California cross looks, or maybe you want a Palomino and a New Zealand, whatever, but just make sure that you're breeding responsibly. If you are just breeding willy-nilly, then that is the quickest way, as with any of our livestock species. If you don't have a goal to be improving your stock and the breed or the breed cross that you've chosen, then your stock will quickly decline. So have really firm parameters on what you're looking for and go from there.
Okay, I'm just real quick posting in the chat me and Jesse's contact info, just in case you have any questions or anything on resources that we provided or whatnot. There's our emails as well as my phone number, my office phone number to go there. So anyway, next we wanted to talk a little bit about care, talk about feeding and water. So to understand this a little better, we kind of need to understand the digestive system of a rabbit. So this is a pop quiz. I want you guys thinking about this question. What large livestock animal is most closely related to rabbits? So I want to give you a second. Think about it. I hope you got your choices ready. Okay, Jesse, go to the next slide. Okay, it's the horse. So actually, if you look at a rabbit and a horse's digestive system, they are very similar. They are really close when it comes to it, and they really digest nutrients very similarly. So some of the things we're going to look at and some fun facts about rabbit is the first thing, and this is true with horses as well, is that they can't vomit. So basically, when this animal eats something, it basically has one way out, and that is the only way it can go out. And so we actually can see that rabbits, if they are not feeling good to their stomach, it can cause serious issues and can be really harmful to the animal itself. The next thing we want to point out is that these rabbits are actually cecotrophs. And because these rabbits are cecotrophs, what that means is they actually will eat their own feces. So rabbits have what we call both feces and cecal pellets. So I said that incorrectly. Rabbits basically, they have two types of pellets. So they're not technically eating their feces. They're actually eating what are called the cecal pellets. So the reason we call it cecal is there's cecal flora in the intestine of this animal that produces essential nutrients and really digests down that fiber from that hay or the products that they're eating that the rabbit can't produce on its own. So what happens is as it goes through the intestine of this animal, they'll actually produce these cecotropes, and then the animal will eat these cecotropes and digest them again. And then on the second pass as those nutrients come through, they'll actually be fecal pellets. And that's what those hard, dry pellets will be, is more of the feces that's coming from that animal. So when we're doing this, this is why it's important that when we're looking at proper diets for rabbits, we're making sure that we maintain a low protein and high fiber. So we want to make sure that they're getting ample nutrients from that fiber. This system you may think is a little weird, and I do think it's weird too, but it's actually very efficient at digesting fiber into a usable form for these animals.
So building on that from a nutrition standpoint, I'm just going to go over the basics of nutrition and what you need to know. So pet rabbits need a feed formulated with 12 to 16% protein. If you have a lactating doe or show rabbits, you might want to up that protein just a little bit to about 18%. But in general, 12 to 16% is going to work for your commercial type rabbits as well. Your commercial feed, so any feed that you can get from any feed supply store or farm store, is going to have all of the necessary nutrients that you need. Look for a feed that says that it's complete or is balanced. That means that it's going to have everything. Avoid any feeds that have mixed things in it. So if it has sunflower seeds or little pieces of dried fruit, those types of things. You see those a lot at pet stores or specialty stores. We want to avoid those altogether. And they're just not as complete for our rabbits, and they're not as good for them. We also want to make sure that I just want to specify. So we talked about the virus, the rabbit virus earlier, and maybe scared you a little bit about getting hay. And that is definitely something to consider. So if you are worried about your hay source, if you have a high quality pellet, you don't need to be providing a ton of hay. But in general, I think that rabbits are going to do a lot better if they have that rough fiber going through their digestive system. It's going to decrease their instance of GI stasis and bloat. So it's going to aid in proper digestion, especially if your hays are low calories. So like a grass hay versus an alfalfa, they're going to be getting all the protein they need from the pellets. So really all they need the grass for is for that digestion. And so what we would call a lower quality hay would also be okay. And then if you can, free choice their hay, especially if you have a lactating doe with some kits on her, that's going to help her be healthy and do what she needs to do. So with our pellets, I already touched on this, but basically plain pellets are best. And then this is just a general nutrition analysis. So all of your bags of feed is going to have this on it. You want to make sure that your fiber is higher than your protein, like this example shows, and look at the ingredients and make sure that your ingredient is what you're expecting. And alfalfa is a great first ingredient that's really popular out here. Grass is another great first ingredient, but we want to avoid ingredients like corn or things like that maybe are not going to be providing that same amount of nutrition. So grass or alfalfa is going to be the best primary ingredient for your nutritional pellets. Then how much does your rabbit need? So I highly recommend having a scale and making sure that you're weighing your rabbits pretty consistently for a couple different reasons. One, if you're handling them consistently, you're going to find if there's any issues earlier on than if not, if you were just visually inspecting them. Rabbits lose condition under their fur a lot quicker than their fur will start falling out. So they may look really plush and fluffy, and when you get your hands on them, they're skin and bones. So, but body weight, for every 6 pounds of body weight, you need a 4th cup of 16% pellets. And of course, read your feed, make sure that you are adjusting this accordingly. But just as an example, this is Zoe. Jake mentioned our pet rabbit. So this is Zoe. She's 4 pounds. She only needs 0.16 cups daily. So she does not need much pellets at all. She thinks she's starving, but she's not. And so we give her free choice hay, and that's all the pellets she needs. And she is just fine. Now, there is an exception to this rule. If you have a lactating doe or growing kits, free choice pellets. Give them as much as they can and will eat. And growing babies will need that until about 7 months. So your herd buck, probably the previous slide, that's going to be fine for him. But for your does and your babies, you might want to just be giving them all the feed that they can eat. And just want to quickly touch on, we get asked this a lot. What kinds of treats or snacks can we give our rabbit? The easiest thing to say is you don't actually need this if you're using a complete feed. So keep that in mind, but great snacks, especially fruit. Zoe loves bananas. She will kill you for a banana. Just a little piece, of course, because you don't want to spike their blood sugar. Dark veggies are really good, spinach, your romaine lettuces, but we want to avoid iceberg lettuce. And on the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about why, but it's because it has this chemical in it called lacticarium. And then we want to also avoid veggies that can cause gas buildup, like kale and beans. And before I go to this next slide, if you are introducing new feed to your rabbit, so, fresh produce from your garden, make sure you're doing it in small amounts so that your rabbit can gradually get used to it. We don't want to upset the microflora in their digestive system, because rabbits also will decline very quickly. If there's anything wrong with their digestive system, they can be dead within 2 hours. So we want to be very careful that we're not causing any kind of bloat or anything like that by moving slow. And then lacticarium is that milky fluid that's secreted by several species of lettuce, but especially your iceberg lettuces. And it's usually from the base of the stems, but it can be all over. So especially if you're pulling iceberg lettuce out of your garden that's really high quality and fresh, that is a big no-no for rabbits. We don't want to give them that because we don't want to make them sick. So just avoid iceberg lettuce altogether. Plus, it's basically just water, so it doesn't offer a lot of nutritional value for them either. And then finally, kind of a no-brainer, water. We never want to restrict their water. And so in Utah, it's really important that in the winter, when our water is going to freeze pretty consistently, we want to make sure that we have a plan in place or procedure in place to make sure that our rabbits have good access to water. So that may be bringing their water bottles in at night and taking fresh water bottles out in the morning. It might be having a heater in your barn, whatever it takes, but make sure that your rabbits have access to water. You can use a water bottle or a water crock. I don't think there's really any difference other than some rabbits prefer one or the other. So keep that in mind.
Okay, before I get going on the meat rabbit cycle, one thing I want to say is I think we might have scared some people about feeding rabbits. It really isn't that bad. We just are giving you some of the examples that people have dealt with that have been problems. Really, when you're consistent with your feeding, when you are consistently feeding these animals, it really runs well. And these animals are healthy, they stay healthy, and it goes well. We're just telling you about some of the worrisome things that can happen on the other end. So, anyway, now switching gears a little bit and talking about the meat rabbit cycle, we kind of want to talk to you about the process and the operation that goes on here. If you want to go to the next slide, Jesse. So one of the things to think about, and I think this is really cool, is that if you're thinking about meat rabbits, if you bought baby rabbits today, you could have meat in your freezer in 6 months. Now that's pretty cool. I mean, it's hard to be able to have meat in your freezer that quick from any livestock species. Really, you can move these animals right along and be able to have them grow. Now, on the next slide here, one of the things that you got to consider is, are you breeding them or there you go. Are you thinking about breeding? Are you buying the kits? Now, when I say kits, kits are baby rabbits. So I just want you guys to know that because I'm going to use that term a little bit. But basically, your bucks can breed as early as 6 months, and your does can actually breed as early as 8 months. And so, really, these animals can breed at a pretty young maturity. I mean, the famous saying, breeding like rabbits. So you know that these animals are basically have adapted to be able to do really well at this. And so on the next slide here, you're going to see, and this is one of the critical things, is that gestation is only 28 to 31 days. So really, you're going to be able to have, litters pretty quickly after breeding and be able to have them basically a kit ready to go or a litter ready to go pretty quickly on that side. If you go to the next slide, Jess. And I'm going to invite Jessie if she wants to add in, I'm going to let her add in on this. But basically what we're going to be looking to do is wean at 6 to 8 weeks. So let me remind you, during this time, while these animals are, still with their mother and everything, basically they're going to be on free choice pellet as well as getting, lactation there as well. And so honestly, right after that point, these animals are about ready. Even up to 8 weeks, they might be ready to harvest. That's just something to consider, is that really it's a pretty quick process for these rabbits. Now, one of the things is you might be thinking, wow, I mean, you can get 12 litters in a year. And no, that is not true. Your does need to be allowed to recoup before rebreeding. And so you're really going to want to give them 2 to 6 weeks. And it's just like Jesse said with handling these animals. You want to make sure to handle your does to feel how their condition is. Hair can hide a lot. So you want to make sure your does are in good condition before you start breeding them again. Allow them to get some recovery behind them and be able to just make sure that they're doing well. Because I mean, after having these meat rabbits, these little kits will actually demand a lot of food and they can really draw down the mother pretty quickly. So next slide, unless you have something to say, Jesse. Okay, so on the meat rabbit cycle, like we talked about, the process is between 8 to 12 weeks. Now, there's some important terms that we need to understand. So this is important because prices are based off of these terms. They're based either by fryers, which is a certain dollar per pound, as well as roasters. So our fryers are going to be less than 5 pounds. So those are going to be a lighter type of rabbit, as well as our roasters are going to be above 5 pounds. And so that's something to consider as you're doing this, because those prices will be different between those two products.
So we just wanted to talk a little bit about harvesting or dispatching at home. And ultimately, what I'm going to do is just refer you to other resources and ideally find someone in your area that is proficient at dispatching rabbits and can help you through that process. But there's multiple resources. Definitely go to like an extension or a .org so that you're getting good, high quality information. But rabbits are really clean to dispatch at your house. So if you are interested in doing that, and want to be completely self-sufficient, there's also opportunity to sell your meat rabbits to a supplier, just like you would sell beef cattle or extra chicken eggs. And then you can get a little bit of income without having to worry about learning that process on your own. So just really quickly, if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to Jake or I. We'd be happy to help you through that process or help you make connections, but we're not going to go through the whole process today. And with that being said, do we have any questions? We'll go ahead and hit the questions in the slide, but I did have just a few things I wanted to cover. We have this fact sheet basically that just has some basic information that summarizes everything that we've discussed today. If you're interested in that, if you want to send Jake or I an email, we will just send you the PDF of that since it's not uploaded into the folder. But so that just has some general information if you are interested in learning a little bit more or want to look into that. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is meat rabbit projects. So if you have youth that are interested in doing being a part of 4-H and doing a meat rabbit project, we do have the opportunity for our youth to participate in 4-H or FFA and do that. So it's perfect for either an urban or a rural setting, and it's a really good opportunity for our youth to start learning a little bit about where their food comes from, have some responsibility, but in a much smaller, less intense project than having a lamb in your backyard or showing a steer. So rabbits are a really good option for youth that want to be involved in the ag industry, but maybe don't have the same resources as some of our more rural kids do. So the meat rabbit projects can be as extensive as having your own rabbits or buying them 30 days before the show, and you just raise them for those 30 days. Remember, those kits are basically ready to go at 12 weeks. So you're going to get them at 6 to 8 weeks, and then you're just going to have them for those 4 weeks after that. August 11th, 2021 would be the deadline to purchase rabbits for the Utah State Fair this year. So more information you can find here. And with that, we will take your questions.